For today's video, we will be taking a look back at 50 different DIY projects I've made so far this year. This is a compilation style video, so sit back, relax, or even DIY right along with me. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. One of the most expensive areas through McCaffeyie & Co. and then also with their Target line are some of their seating options. For example, this metal frame and shearling accent chair for $250 just seems like a little much for what it is, especially when I know that eventually you can find a really similar option at the thrift store for only $9.99. Now, one thing that a brand new chair won't have is any scuffs or scrapes or stains. Now, this chair was in otherwise really great condition with the exception of two areas. On either side of the outside of the chairs was a little staining, so all I decided to do was take a stain remover. Per the instructions, just state to spray on and let sit for at least 5 minutes. So that is exactly what I did. And then I just took a lint-free cloth after that 5 minutes was up and just gently scrubbed the fabric. And it's like it's brand new. I also did sanitize the chair using a disinfectant spray and my steamer. With the stains then removed, I just wanted to make one small modification to this brass piece. It was just a little too bright for me. Taking a foam brush and this paint that I picked up from Michael's for a few dollars, I'm just going to keep applying this on until I get the desired effect of that kind of patinaed brass that's really in the rest of the living room space. Under $15 for an accent chair just really doesn't exist when you shop retail. So I'm really happy that I found this piece and I think it makes a beautiful addition to my living room space. When Shay McGee posted their updated house tour, she showed these really beautiful stools, but they are $530 a piece. So when I found this ottoman at the thrift store for just $10, I don't think I've ever pulled a tag off faster to claim it. The silhouette of this stool was super similar to the one from McCaffeyie & Co., just needed a few modifications. First went in with some textured black spray paint, flipping it upside down, worked on the bottom first, and then once that dried, flipped it right side up, just to make sure that everything is in fact really well covered because there are a lot of curves in this piece. The textured black spray paint adds just the perfect amount of texture. Versus just using a typical matte black or even a satin black, this really does make it still look and feel like a metal. Some of you may remember when I reupholstered that ottoman that's in my office and I had just enough fabric left over to also reupholster this ottoman. Couple things that I find are really helpful when you're reupholstering anything is just to separate what you can so you can get the cleanest finish overall. I also like to just keep flipping it around, making sure that it's looking the way I'm thinking it's looking as I'm continuing to staple along the bottom. Just remove any excess fabric. To attach the fabric, I use my electric staple gun, and for the thin pieces of fabric, so not the corners, I get away with just the smaller staples. But in the corners, I do like to use kind of a heavy duty staple just to make sure that that fabric is going to stay in place. Looking back at the inspiration, I realized that that bottom square piece was actually covered in the fabric. So although the upholstering is not going to be identical, it's not a pillow sitting on top because it just wouldn't look quite right. So rather than just paint the bottom, I just decided to also reupholster that piece, and I just did so using a spray adhesive. Now, of course, it's not identical, but if you're on a budget, or even if you're not on a budget and you just really don't want to spend $500 on one ottoman, shopping secondhand is a really great way to get an overall really similar look, but in a much more cost-effective way. So we've talked about these books in the past, these linen wrapped books. You don't get to even choose the books. You don't know what the books are. You just choose the fabric, and it is over $350. So the next project is a little out there, but just let's go with it. So one thing you can always find at the thrift store are VHS boxes. Sometimes they have the VHS in them, sometimes they do not. So I just grabbed 4 of these boxes. What's nice is they're all uniform in size. So what if instead, I've been collecting specifically Christmas related ones because I have a Christmas DIY in mind. I'm just gonna remove those, set those off to the side. Once everything was disinfected, cleaned, and dried, it's then just time to add our linen fabric on. Taking my Gorilla Glue spray adhesive, I'm just going to spray all along the outside of this VHS box. Grab my scrap linen fabric that I have left over from other projects, and we are just going to press this on this box here. I really love this adhesive because it's not as messy as Mod Podge, and it really is so forgiving. If you mess up or if there's a wrinkle, you can just simply pull it back and then reapply. The part that requires the most focus is to now get so close to that VHS box that it's basically now just flush against the edges. To finish it off, I will use Mod Podge here, just taking a small brush or my finger and just attaching all along the edges so everything is nicely sealed, and it just gives an overall more finished look. Another nice thing is that they do provide a little bit of storage. I mean, it's not going to be a ton, but you can put rubber bands in here, zip ties, paper clips, just maybe make a marking at the bottom of what is actually in there. But it gives you a little bit of storage. I think you get an overall similar look and for a much more affordable price point. If you really want to achieve that magnolia hearth and hand look in your space, it's really important to pay attention to the details, because oftentimes it's just something that's really super simple, but there's some sort of a checker print or a scallop detail or wood etching. There's something that's keeping it feeling a little bit more interesting and fresh. But you can find really great base pieces at the thrift store, and then you can customize it to make it into whatever you want. I found both of these wood boxes. They were in really good condition, just needed obviously a good clean. For wood pieces from the thrift store, I usually like to use some sort of degreaser just to get any gunk and grime off, and then I will go in with my sander. So because the color wasn't already something that I use in my space and it wasn't uniform to begin with, just going in with some 80 grit sandpaper, and then I will finish it off with 220 grit just to give a nice smooth finish overall. I also gave it a dusting of spray paint just to neutralize any orange or yellow tones that might be remaining. Then it's time to customize. So I like to go in with that perfect brown tone. It comes across at first a little gray and red because it's watered down, but once it dries the most perfect neutral brown. There are quite a bit of linear patterns on the Magnolia website, and you can do the same thing with just a little bit of painter's tape. So taking some painter's tape, just made these stripes along either side. Again, just providing a little bit more visual interest to get a more similar look to something you would find on Magnolia. With the tape in place, going over now with just wax, not mixed with anything else and not watered down, using a wax specific brush. And then now to finish it off, we're just going to add one final layer of antiquing wax with a foam brush just to give a nice finished look. Totally optional, but because these were so inexpensive because I found them at the bins, I just wanted to spruce them up a little bit. She uses often a lot of aged brass detailing on her wooden pieces, so I grabbed these hinges. I think they were $7 for both of them on Amazon, so I will link that in the description box below. But a super simple transformation that I think just, again, adds a little bit more interest in a really beautiful way. However, sometimes at the thrift store, you can find really interesting and unique pieces that don't really need much besides a color change. So I found this wood riser, or so I thought here, but now on second thought, I'm assuming this was some sort of a butcher block, maybe because there seems to be a slot that maybe a knife was there. The knife wasn't there when I picked it up from the bins, so I was just left with this. Same deal here as in the project before, degreaser first, and then sand down the same way that we did with the boxes. Once all of the dust was removed, same deal, just gave a dusting of that sand spray paint just to neutralize everything. And then instead of doing the wax, because when I did that with this specific piece, it really resembled my flooring, so I just decided to go over it with just a little bit of watered down taupe paint mixed with water just to give it a more overall seamless look. Pieces like these can be really great because they are incredibly versatile. You could use it as a little mini plant stand to raise a plant up or to store a candle and some matches. It just becomes hard for me to justify spending those magnolia prices when I know eventually I can come up with something pretty similar at the thrift store. Moving along now to decorative trays. Pottery Barn has so many beautiful options to choose from, but they are quite expensive. Because I often use trays in so many areas of my decorating, it would add up very quickly. So what I personally like to do is take that inspiration, go to the thrift store, find a tray. This one was just $1.25. Loved the shape of this tray, but it's made of melamine, and I would at least prefer it to look like it's made of metal. So to achieve that look, I have a lot of aged brass in my space. So I take a combination of 3 different spray paints. The first one is a metallic brass spray paint. Then I will go in with a matte black spray paint over top of it. And then to finish it off, I will go over that with a champagne bronze. This is a really forgiving combination as well, because if you do get too much, let's say black in one area, you can soften it by adding more brass or adding more champagne bronze to get a really weathered and aged brass look. Because I had all of the spray paints already on hand, this tray only cost $1.25, and I think it complements my open shelving so beautifully. If you have been following this channel, you guys know that I really do try to use only real florals as much as possible, but there are some times where you just need to use faux, and that can definitely be true when it comes to wreaths. Wreaths from high-end stores can be super expensive. So if you can find, even if it's just a garland at the thrift store that can become a wreath, I always recommend picking it up. The other thing I want to point out is how full the wreaths are from these high-end stores. So in order to get the same fullness, you need a lot of the same flowers. One thing that you can definitely find this time of year especially is once the weddings are over, you will see collections after collections of wedding centerpieces. And generally speaking, they're a lot of the same type of flower and definitely better quality since it was used on such an important day. Now, I've been married for a long time, so I definitely don't have a use for all of these wedding centerpieces, but I can definitely use these florals again into making a really full and beautiful wreath. For your wreath form, if you want to kind of expedite the process, I prefer foam just because then you can literally just stick the flowers right into the foam. If ever I see these at the thrift store, I always pick them up, even if I have to remove florals the first time around. Putting an emphasis on the fullness, so doing one larger hoop wreath form and then a smaller one to fit on the inside will give that fullness that you'll see often in high-end stores. Then I'm also just going to add in these hydrangeas that I also picked up from the bins. You would be surprised how many really great stems you can find at the Goodwill bins, so just make sure that you're really digging and checking through, especially at the bottom. Using some spray adhesive as well as a UV protectant spray to keep these leaves staying nice and green. Whenever I skip this step, it seems like my leaves always end up turning blue by the end of the season. So just doing this little step really helps to keep your wreath looking good all season long. While I definitely love the wreaths from Williams-Sonoma and Anthropologie more, it's hard for me to justify spending that much when I know eventually if I go to the Goodwill bins consistently, I can come out with something that looks really beautiful but on a budget. This is one of those areas that I think can be so tempting because it's like no-brainer styling. You can just go right to the Hearth and Hand collection, pick a pre-arranged floral arrangement, and you're done. And I've done that. But also a really easy thing to do yourself. Pick any vase that you find at the thrift store. If you don't like the color, it doesn't matter. We can change that anyway. Sometimes I think the thrift store overcharges on pottery. This vase from retail was going to be $6, and then I found it at the bins for less than $1. Just mixed some plaster of Paris with some white acrylic paint. Just gave that 2 to 3 coats just to make sure the vase was completely covered. Just gave it a gentle sanding with some 220 grit sandpaper just to get rid of any like areas that were peaking, and then just took some watered down antiquing wax and then just wiped off the excess with a paper towel. And you get the same kind of look that I think she does a lot through the Hearth and Hand line, that kind of just distressed pottery found this one stem at the thrift store, but I wanted it to be a little bit more full. So this is a stem I would recommend from the Hearth and Hand line. I think for $4.99, it is kind of a more realistic look than a lot of the other things you'll see, and you can really create something so beautiful but on a budget when you shop mostly secondhand. My advice when you are thrifting furniture is always have some sort of inspiration picture that you can kind of refer back to make sure that your thrifted piece does really in fact resemble your inspiration piece that you're really trying to go for. So I love this chair from Shop Amber Interiors, but it is over $800, not including shipping. Even upholstered chairs at Target can cost at least $200. So when I found this chair at the Goodwill for just $20 and then I had a 35% off coupon, I thought it is worth the attempt to try to make this similar to my inspiration piece. Right off the bat, I knew this was going to have to be reupholstered because the fabric was damaged. Other things I like to consider are the integrity of the wood or the metal, as well as is it structurally sound? Is the chair wobbly? Will it need to be refurbished in any other way? Otherwise, the chair was in really great condition. I just had to remove this top piece here. So I just had to cut the fabric and unscrew it from both the top and the bottom, so that way it can kind of just pop right out. Similar to the bottom, just had to unscrew the bottom cushion from the chair itself, as well as just loosen it ever so slightly so I could remove it from the chair so I would be able to reupholster it. I like to remove the fabric. It's not necessary, but I do like to remove the fabric so that when I go to apply my own fabric, it's just basically copying and pasting. With a pencil, I just like to trace out what the shape of the original fabric looked like, and I do give myself a little bit of slack. And personally, I like to run things like this through the sewing machine so that way you just get a really clean finish. When you try to upholster without sewing, you just create so much bunching and fabric and it looks like a DIY project, and you want things to look as seamless as possible. Making sure not to pull too taut so that way that seam now has become wavy. You want to make sure that you're just pulling taut enough to keep everything nice and straight throughout. With the fabric in place, I did decide to put the black piece that was initially there back on just to give it a more finished look, and then just screwed the chair back together and tightened it back up so it'd be nice and secure. For the top piece, this is where things can get a little bit tricky. So one thing I have found that is helpful is obviously to just remove the fabric like we did for the bottom. You want to cut out enough fabric, giving yourself some allowance on either side when you go to staple. But before you do that, and you need to place some sort of a finished backing on, you want to buzz through your sewing machine almost like one side of a pillowcase just to create some nice seams there. And you're going to do that about 1.5 inches in so that way you can staple this fabric on to the back piece, but then when you pull the fabric over, it looks nice and finished. With everything stapled down now and the back piece can just kind of fold over and lie flat, I just did some Velcro adhesive to the back so it would stay nice and in place. Because, and why this is tricky, is I need to get this piece in so that way I can screw the pieces back together. So I still need access to these screws before completely attaching it in place. Of course, it's not identical to the $850 chair from Shop Amber Interiors, but for just about $35, I think I have a super similar look on a budget. One of the most common items I find at the thrift store are laundry carts. Laundry carts that look just like this. So of course, found one of these. This one was just $6. The bones of it were actually really good, but the liner was tearing and had stains. So I just decided to remove that part altogether and let's turn it into something else. Now, of course, if the liner is good, you could just simply use it as that. This one was threaded through it, so I did have to unscrew it just for a second so I could remove that liner, and then I just put it back together. So I really thought I had struck gold with these baskets here. I was gonna paint them and they were gonna fit perfectly, but sadly they did not. So I had to come up with another solution. So while I was looking all around my house, I came across this here. It's like a metal mesh roll that felt pretty heavy duty. So I decided to lay it out And what if instead of making a wood basket, something that would be a whole lot faster is just to make a metal basket instead. So in order to do that, grabbed some utility gloves as well as my shears, and I just removed 3 of the squares from each corner after taking some measurements of how much of this material I would need for the top. In order to connect those pieces now, I just grabbed a book and I'm just going to fold it now up towards the book so I can get a nice clean corner on each side. With everything folded up, now I just needed to connect the corners together. So I did leave some excess in those areas so that way I would be able to take my needle nose pliers and twist them into place. Taking a closer look at these baskets from Pottery Barn, I'm assuming they're meant to feel antique and weathered because there's almost a champagne bronze look to them. From a distance, they do look like they're black, but they're actually not. So in order to get a similar look, I did paint the entire thing black and then a dusting of some champagne bronze paint. In order to keep this being pretty quick and time sensitive, I wanted whatever we put on the bottom to just kind of be ready to go. So I remembered I went to the antique mall weeks ago and found these really cool crates that had almost like a primitive look to them. And I hadn't done anything with them yet. So when I tried to put these on the bottom of the laundry cart, it was like it was made for it. Now, if you don't have crates that look like this, I know Michael's sells those crates and they're almost always on sale. So I would recommend going that route. So by taking a $6 laundry cart from the thrift store and combining it with the most random pieces in my house, I was able to create something that I feel is really beautiful. When it comes to the types of metals, you'll see on Magnolia and the Hearth and Hand collection, the main theme is that it's aged, that it's vintage, that it's patinaed. Finding perfectly aged pieces at the thrift store can actually be quite the challenge. So my advice is find something that is a shape that is reminiscent to something that you love from Magnolia, but now you have complete control. You can go in and add a ton of aging and patina. So when it comes to patinaed or aged brass, I do this quite a bit on the channel, usually using between 3 to 5 different paint mediums to get the desired look. However, most recently I found this spray paint. It's not new, I'm sure, but it's new to me, and it's called Classic Bronze by Rust-Oleum. It gives just the most matte, beautiful patina in just one can of spray paint. It's a little tricky to see the difference in examples like these because they're already gold, but you're just adding more depth. But on a vase like this one, let's say, this vase was just $4 and then I had 35% off. So I knew that the shape was something that I really liked. Definitely reminiscent of something I could find through Magnolia, but I wanted to give it that aged patinaed brass effect. I did several light coats, just waiting 5 to 10 minutes between each coat, and you get a nice seamless look with no drip marks. And you can definitely just stop here. This is really that beautiful classic bronze look. But when brass patinas, it doesn't patina completely evenly. So I do like to add in a few choice areas some dusting of black spray paint just to give it a little bit more of a realistic look. All that's left to do now is just make sure you're using a matte clear sealer and you will have pieces that look like this. So for these 3 home decor pieces, they were under $10 total at the Goodwill, and then the spray paint was just about $9. So $20 for 3 pieces that you can use for styling all around your home. Your shelves, your entryway tables, your coffee table, all of those pieces need some form of decor, right? But you don't have to pay these insane Magnolia prices to have a beautiful space. In addition to aged brass, I've also been seeing a lot of aged copper on the Magnolia website and actually through Hearth and Hand. You can find this sometimes more at antique malls than I would say the thrift store, but every now and then you can get lucky and find a few really great pieces. I found this patinaed copper tea kettle for just $5. Again, got 35% off as well with my coupon. So a really great deal on a piece that just adds that warmth and that character to a space that might be leaning a little bit more modern. I've really been loving these aged copper planters from Magnolia, and the price wasn't actually that bad. I was contemplating buying both of these, but I realized how small they are. which of course is probably why they are on the more affordable side on the Magnolia website. So I thought I'll just wait it out at the thrift store. I ended up finding this one, which was really nice. I wanted planters that were a little bit larger. We started a lot of things from seeds, so now they are ready to move into bigger planters. And while it would have been so nice to find 2 of these, I only found 1, but I also found this galvanized pot here, originally from IKEA. I paid $3 for it. And my thought was, what if we can just take this IKEA planter that's just really standard and turn it into an aged copper planter instead? It's important to notice the colors and the pattern of the patina when you're trying to replicate something, so keeping it nearby is always a good idea. So at first I just went in with some copper spray paint, and once that dried, I then went over it with, again, choice areas, adding some black spray paint, some bronze spray paint, just to give it that variation that you will see in things that are truly patinaed. And while with just the spray paint, I felt like I was pretty close, I still wanted to add a little bit more depth and variation. So in order to do that, I just mixed some brown paint with some orange paint to get that copper color. Applying that copper color with a damp paper towel just gives a more authentic look overall, and then you're able to blend it much easier when you add the antiquing wax. While it's definitely not a perfect dupe, I think I got pretty close to getting that aged copper look just using supplies that I already had. I will link all of the supplies I did use in the description box below if you are interested in creating a similar look. But if you're striking out in the lamp section, try also checking the candle section of your thrift store. So I found this tripod style candlestick holder. I just grabbed a shade. I'm going to combine these 2 pieces together to put this in my entryway. I don't have any electricity on the wall of my entryway. Adding a USB rechargeable light and a cap for the light bulb to sit inside of, I'm able to have lighting in a place that otherwise doesn't allow me to. One glass taper candle holder is $34. Let's say you want to buy 3 of them. Now it's over $100. Or you could just go to the thrift store. Yes, they're not as detailed or as beautiful, but they also are only $6 for all 3 of them. Another style of glassware that you would want to keep your eyes out for is anything ribbed, but with a modern silhouette like this vase here. I think this would be something that McGee & Co. would definitely sell, and it would not be for just $1. I found this brass tray here. I like to pay attention to all of the details. So what do the handles look like? The handles look very similar to the tray from McGee & Co. The biggest difference was their tray did not have glass in the middle. It was just solid brass. So to remedy that, I'm just going to first clean it, sand down the glass just a bit with some fine grit sandpaper so you have better adhesion when you add your spray paint. Always make sure the spray paint that you're using is appropriate for the material you're using to spray paint it on. Gave a couple coats of the brass spray paint to distress it just a bit. I'm going in with that more champagne bronze acrylic paint that we used in the beginning of this video, giving it an overall mattified, aged look. Again, not identical, but really close for just a few bucks. So of course I'm not going to find this exact cutting board, but I did find this butcher block at the Goodwill outlet for just a few dollars. Took some quick measurements, just going to take it out to my miter saw so I can cut it at an angle just like the one from McGee & Co. To make that larger hole in the middle, I didn't have a blade big enough, so I just borrowed one from my neighbor. I think these normally retail for $10 to $15, but if I only need it for this project, I don't necessarily need to go out and buy the attachment. With everything cut out now, it's just time for some sanding. Generally, I like to start out with 60 or 80, then I'll move up to 120 and then 220 grit. And that just really gives you the cleanest finish overall on any wood piece. For stain, I'm going to use this antiquing wax. It's my absolute favorite. Gives you just a nice neutral brown undertone that complements my space very well. Made this little leather strap to hang it from my peg rail, and I think it's the perfect addition to the space. When it comes to decorating for summer, of course, a lot of us are spending a lot more time outdoors, and with that being said, The most expensive purchase we likely will make if we're in the market for it will be all of the outdoor furniture. So what I have come to find is that oftentimes people recycle through outdoor furniture seemingly more quickly than indoor furniture. And I believe that's probably because maybe they don't have the time or the resources to bring those outdoor pieces back to life, which works out really great for people like us who don't mind investing some time and a little bit of money into making something beautiful again. For example, I love this table from McGee & Co., but it's almost $1,000. Jumping back over now to our thrifted bistro set, couple things that were missing were, of course, the umbrella, and then one of the chairs was starting to unravel. All things that, of course, we can fix and then tailor to our own personal design style. The color of this woven material is so reminiscent of things you can also find on McGee & Co.'s website, but again, for a small fortune. So we're just going to take a little bit of inspiration from the McGee & Co. website and apply it to this bistro set. You could, of course, just decide to paint these all black or whatever color you do like, but I wanted to keep that color of that woven material because I thought it was so beautiful. Just wasn't totally crazy about the green. So I took some enamel spray paint that I will link in the description box below in order to really give it that forged iron-like look. As for the top of the table, we will be doing a different application here, but there was some bubbling happening. So I just decided to sand that down so it was nice and smooth and took my shop vac to just remove any excess dust. After sealing that black paint with just a matte outdoor sealer, it's just time now to remove all of the paper and the tape, and time now to move over to the table. So I wasn't able to actually remove that middle section there, so I had to just slightly lift it in order to get the tape underneath so I could get a nice clean finish. Using that same spray paint that we used for the chairs and just applying that now to the legs of this table. In order to give this table a much more modern and stone-like finish, we're going to use a product called Henry's Feather Finish. Mixing it enough so you get almost a pancake batter consistency, just spreading that out with a putty knife, continuing to smooth it out all over the top of this table. Then I like to go in with an abrasive sander, so like 60 or 80 grit, taking my shop vac, removing any dust, and then to finish it off, go in with a paintbrush, slightly more watered down mix of your Henry's Feather Finish. Letting that fully dry, then sanding it one more time with some 220 grit sandpaper, and then of course it's time to seal it. Using the same black spray paint that we used in other areas of this project, we're just going to also apply that paint around the middle of this table. As I mentioned earlier, this table didn't come with an umbrella, so you really have two options. The cheapest option is to just plug that hole. They're between $5 and $10 off of Amazon, but in this case, because I'm gifting this to my sister, I wanted her to have an umbrella, so I went through mac.bid, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in this video. Some of you may remember when I found those Pottery Barn chair cushions. Now, I only needed 6 for my table as it only seats 6 people. So I found 8, which means I had 2 more left over. Decided to also gift these to my sister just to make the chairs a little bit more aesthetic and comfortable. Just took my fabric shaver to remove any pilling that was happening on the tops of these cushions. Just about $75 for a 2-person bistro set with an umbrella does not happen when you shop retail. And I think for a lot of people, they think, well, what they're sacrificing cost-wise isn't going to give them the look that they want. But in my personal opinion, this looks just as beautiful as if I were to buy something from West Elm, Crate and Barrel, Pottery Barn, but I didn't have to spend those insane prices. Moving along now to summer textiles. This is an area, again, you just want to make sure the selections that you're choosing create a sophisticated environment. If ever you're on the fence about pattern or colors to use, opting with just a beautiful white linen is a great option. Found this cube ottoman here. We're just going to remove the cushion cover that was on it, which was nice because it was meant to be removed and then washed. I'm just going to break apart all of the seams so then I can see when I choose my fabric how I'm going to need to sew it back together. Basically, just using the previous textile as a pattern makes it so much easier. So I'm sure a lot of you know that Joann Fabrics is going out of business. So I was able to snag so much great fabric for almost nothing. Just going to match up the old fabric with the fabric that I'm choosing to recover this ottoman with. After cutting out all of the sections, I'm then just going to place the top on top of the ottoman, and then I'm going to lay all of the sides with the good sides facing together so the bad sides will be facing up top. I'm going to pin those down just to make sure that the corners are going to line up really perfectly, and then I'm just going to buzz that through the sewing machine based on what I marked. Also removed the Velcro sections from the previous fabric so that way I can just attach them to this fabric and it can still be a cover that I can of course remove. Adding this also to that bistro set will just give a relaxed summer vacation vibe. Another really common theme through Hearth and Hand and Magnolia are wall storage options. They have a lot of different varieties of the same kind of thing. These woven shelves, display cabinets, closed cabinetry, a lot of ways to decorate your walls. Again, that's not artwork, but provides a little bit of storage in a really beautiful way. But over $250 is pretty steep for something that is quite small. However, I did find this woven cabinet here. Now, I knew my work would definitely be cut out for me. One of the doors was already starting to break off, the back was completely busted, and the particle board was basically ruined. But I thought, even if it doesn't pan out, I only spent $6 and I think I can make it look way better. The first thing I needed to do was fix the door, and I wanted to also remove that braided trim because it was coming off in certain areas, so it was very much like an all or nothing, so I opted for nothing. But then of course that exposed some of the staples, which is why they probably put it on in the first place. So I did just then build a small frame that goes around the front just to give it a more finished look. Removed the hardware, and then after I attached my frame with my nail gun, I then just filled the holes with some wood filler, let that dry, and then also sanded it down. So after everything was prepped, it was ready for paint or stain, and because this piece was already the color I wanted it to be primarily, I just thought I could go over it with antiquing wax, but then I ran into a little issue. So here's the problem I'm having with this, because the previous owner, whoever painted this, because it definitely was painted, used spray paint that was a satin finish, and whenever you're painting wicker or woven material and you apply wax on top of something that is a satin or something that's a bit shiny, it has this tendency to then wipe off. So like even me just doing that, like it's never gonna stick because of the sheen used. So new plan is to spray paint this now with some khaki or sand spray paint that is flat or very matte, and then we will finish it off with a sealer. But before we go any further with the paint, see, like right here, it's just wiping off. So let's talk now about this problem here, because a lot of the ones from Magnolia actually don't have a back. So I'm going to staple these in place with my staple gun, and then I'm going to cut out the section that obviously will remove this and this, but then I'll have also some more material to repair a few areas in the doors. After removing that back section, I also just wanted to sand down the particle board that was starting to bubble, so that way when I go in with my grass cloth contact paper, it will adhere very evenly. And now it's just time for paint. So I'm gonna link this paint in the description box below. At this point, I didn't know if I was going to add wax on top of it, but I actually ended up really liking the way this spray paint applied. It really is just the perfect tone for basket or woven material. So I will link this in the description box below. If you find a thrifted basket that you just really don't love the color, it's too orange, it's too red, it's too yellow, this is a nice quick way to change it. Then it was just time now to add our sealer, going in again with a matte sealer to give a more natural look. A lot of the Magnolia pieces had a rod or some way to hang things from it, so I found this one for 50 cents at the Hartville thrift shop, and then I just took these small brackets from old hardware that I wasn't using to attach to the bottom of this woven cabinet. The next problem, obviously the shelves had been really beat up, so One quick way, a cheap way to just fix it and make it look not so terrible is by adding contact paper. If you have an entryway table or a dresser that the top is just really beat up, spending $7 on a roll of contact paper is just a really easy, inexpensive solution that might give you a couple more years with that piece of furniture. For hardware, I found these at Menards. They were, I think, about $2 or $3 each. Just going to screw those in place. Now flipping the cabinet upside down, we're going to drill small pilot holes on either side for my dowel to sit inside of, so then that way we can hang things from it. I spent just about $18 to bring this woven cabinet back to life, and I think it is a great addition to any space if you're lacking storage. And this is something I come across so often, especially at the Goodwill bins. So for example, I found this candle holder here. It said celebrate on it. You guys know my style, that's just really not for me. So I just decided to sand the whole thing down, give it a more rustic look. And I'm trying to think of something that I can add those metal pieces on because I love that feature from the Pottery Barn one. So if you guys have any ideas, leave me a comment down below. But this piece was maybe $1 or $2, and I think you get an overall similar feel. Same goes for pin boards. You definitely don't need to spend $35 at Target. You can spend a couple bucks at the Goodwill bins. I found this huge pin board, definitely not my style, so we're going to remove all of the ribbon and the frame, and we're just going to use, again, a frame that we find at the thrift store. I loved this wooden frame here. I loved the graining on it. The color wasn't terrible. It was more orange in person than it's showing on camera. So I did just decide to sand it down first, removed any dust, and then went in with some antiquing wax that I watered down just a little bit and add a little bit of gray paint to it. Gives you the most just neutral brown color, which I think no matter what your floors are, what your style is, can really be a timeless option. Because the pin board was bigger than what I needed for this frame, I just needed to cut out a section and then I attached it with some epoxy glue in the back. Under $5 for a wood frame pin board would just not happen at Magnolia and even through Hearth & Hand. But by shopping at the thrift store, you can create timeless pieces for your space on a budget. However, more often than not, it's not like you just walk into the thrift store the first time, find exactly what you're looking for. No DIY needs to be done. But what I like to ask myself, this is why I say I like to keep an open mind, is I just think of every furniture piece as material. So are the materials in this furniture piece able to be transformed into the furniture piece that I'm really looking for? This is one of those above the toilet shelf stands. I'm not really in need of one of those. However, as we're getting into gardening season, we're starting all of our seeds now. I wanted to have a place in my office where my kids can also track their progress, but also in an aesthetic way. So all we're gonna do with this shelf stand here is remove the bottom piece, which would initially be left room for obviously a toilet. And I'm just going to do that, taking some quick measurements, and then I'm going to take it out to my circular saw on some sawhorses, just remove that bottom section there. Now that the top piece has become the bottom piece, I added some wood glue initially, and then I also tapered the angles so that it would meet in the middle. I just took my nail gun, secured those in place. In order for them to connect at the top, I just used an L bracket. The problem with the L bracket was it was a bit too wide, so I had to push it down in order for it to be the correct angle for the top of this shelf. Could definitely choose to stop here, but I wanted to give it a more modern look, so I just decided to wipe it down and then just go in with some Krylon black satin spray paint, and then of course seal it. Brought it into the office, placed all of our seed starters, and this is working out really well. Because this is a temporary piece of furniture, we're not always starting seeds, but during this time of year, it's nice to save where you can, but still get all of your needs met. Another quick example of that, when we are hosting, especially in the summer, I like to be able to have some sort of a bar cart or tray. Now, again, I didn't find a bar cart, I found a laundry cart, but the concept is really the same. So this bar cart was just $5. I don't need a laundry cart. My laundry is way down in our basement. So carts like this don't really make sense for my space, but it gives me the basic structure I need to create a bar cart. Bar carts that are woven with a wood detail or a brass detail, even from affordable stores like Target, can be upwards around $100. So when I'm pretty confident I can make this for about $30, I am all for it. So taking the bar cart, took some quick measurements, went to the hardware store, grabbed 2 of these 3 feet panels because they were the exact dimensions that I needed. If you do not have a miter saw, if you do not have a circular saw, you can have them cut the wood there for you. And essentially what I'm doing is just making custom trays to fit on both the top and the bottom of this was once laundry cart, which will now be a bar cart for hosting. If you have a miter saw that slides out, I unfortunately don't. So I started with my miter saw and then popped it on some sawhorses and then just continued on with my circular saw. You don't necessarily need to add the trim around the piece of wood, but I thought that it would make it look more like a tray if it was there. So I just had this scrap trim in my stash, just taking my miter saw, took some quick measurements, cut those down as well. In order to attach all of these trim pieces around each tray, I like to generally start out with Gorilla Wood Glue, just paint it on and then clamp that down for about an hour or so. And then I will go in with my nail gun, fill all of the holes, sand them down, and then it is prepped for stain or paint. In order to kill a lot of the yellow undertones that just don't work with my space, I decided to first go in with a driftwood spray paint just to mask again those yellow undertones. Also applied that same spray paint to the cart itself, so that way when I'm wrapping the rattan around, it's less noticeable if there is a small gap. With that all dry, now it's just time to go in with stain. Initially, I went in with a more driftwood-like stain combination, but decided to change it up and go with the stain coffee, so it's a nice dark chocolate brown for the trays. With the trays complete, now it's just time to work on the actual cart. So you could really expedite this DIY and just paint it with some metallic brass spray paint or textured black spray paint to give it a more iron-like look, and you can buzz through this DIY really quickly. I really love a woven look in a bar cart. I think it just feels very Tulum, very vacation vibes, which is perfect for spring and summer. One thing about me is if I have an excess amount of material from leftover projects, I really try to use it up in other areas in my space, not only because does that add to the cohesion of my space, but also it's not just sitting collecting dust in a closet somewhere. I have and still have so much of this woven material left over, so I decided to just wrap the entire cart with this material as well as in another project we'll get to next. Now for styling. If you are somebody who struggles with styling, my best advice is just to look at the item you're trying to style. Just do a quick Google search and see how your favorite designers are styling something that looks pretty similar. Make a list, go to the thrift store, try to find things that are similar or that could be similar, and you would be really surprised at how close you can really get, but by saving a ton in the process. One of the most important areas in design is lighting. Lighting can really affect how your space feels and looks, and it is so expensive when you shop designer. It's even still kind of expensive when you shop the Target home goods route. So I always recommend going to the thrift store because you would be so surprised the beautiful lights that you can find, and even if they're not so beautiful like this lamp here, you can turn them into something really beautiful. Again, especially for spring and summer, I love to incorporate that woven element into my decor. So best advice, find a lamp that you're maybe not necessarily crazy about. You could even do this to a lamp that you might already have. Maybe you're considering donating it. Instead of donating it, I spent very little money on all of this material and it has stretched out to 3 different projects and I still have some left over. So this is kind of a monotonous, time-consuming project, but it's super straightforward and easy. Anybody can really do this. throw on your favorite movie or podcast and just keep gluing and wrapping, gluing and wrapping. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Because I used hot glue, sometimes there's strands that stick out, so I just like to take a blow dryer so I see where they're at and I just pull them off so it gives a more finished look. Because this lamp did not come with a shade, I had to get a little creative, we'll call it. So I had this Uno lamp shade in my stash, decided to use that as an anchor for the other shade that I found that was just $3 at Crazy Bins. And I'm just going to stack this shade on top of the shade that I already had, just to give it a more proportionate look, but then also still be able to sit upright. You can also take this component and add it to the other lampshade, but for the sake of time, this is just an easier way and you get a really similar look to something that can cost hundreds of dollars for just around the $12 price point. If you're not new to this channel, you guys know I love a wall sconce. So when I found these at Target for just $5, I instantly had to pick up a few. We are just going to use one for this project. Rattan and woven wall sconces from some of your favorite high-end designers can be very expensive. So I had found this wall sconce months ago. It's just been sitting in my stash. It was just $2. Initially, my thought was to wrap the shade around with, again, that woven material. But when I found these, I thought this would make the perfect shade for this sconce. So the only thing I had to do was take apart the sconce. I needed to keep this bottom component so that way it would still slide into the holes that are attached to the wall. So I just took that, placed it inside of the scalloped basket. You can also choose to hardwire this if you have an existing sconce there and you're just wanting to swap them out, but because I don't, I like to go the chargeable or battery operated light route. The only thing I didn't love was the color of the sconce, so I just gave it a few coats of some metallic brass spray paint, connected the two pieces together. Something similar at Anthropologie, at Pottery Barn Kids would be a small fortune. So the fact that this is just $7 and you get a really similar look is a really great price point. So because we changed up the lamp on her dresser, I also wanted to change the mirror behind it. So I decided that I wanted to do something because her existing mirror was already woven and it was just too much of the same material. So I wanted to find something that was this shape. Lo and behold, I was just about to leave the thrift store, thought maybe better check one more time the mirrors, and then this guy came out for just $8. This is normally from Hobby Lobby, $129.99. You could add one of these details. You can pick these up at Lowe's or Home Depot, glue them on, spray paint it, and you can get a more vintage inspired look. But I just wanted something really streamlined and clean. So the fact that this was just $8 and something similar at Pottery Barn is almost $400, I think is a major savings. Before you go out and feel the pressure to buy all new things, consider transforming things that you already have. Some of you might remember when I found this almost like a milk glass bunny dish container, and it was perfect for last year, but I wanted to give it a more patinaed brass look. You could definitely find patinaed brass pieces at antique stores, at thrift stores. Most recently found this sweet little bud vase that looked so similar to the one from Magnolia, as well as this piece here. Perfect for shelf styling. But a piece that I really wanted that is now sold out was this patinaed brass bunny container. And remembering that I had this piece here that was very similar in shape, we're just going to achieve that look with a very simple painting technique. Started off with just a few coats of this metallic gold spray paint, letting that dry, and then going over that with some matte brown acrylic paint with a foam brush. Then going over that with some watered down black paint. Just as that begins to dry, add a layer of flour to mattify the whole look. The final step is to go in with the acrylic paint called Champagne Gold, just to again give it a more vintage feel. All of these supplies I already had on hand, as well as of course the bunny container. Now it's not an identical dupe, but it is overall really similar, and the best part about it all is that I didn't have to spend any additional money. I know that florals for spring isn't necessarily groundbreaking, but I think it's the way that you do it that can make it feel a little bit more personal and special to you. So when it comes to textiles, floral pillows from high-end stores can be really expensive. And one thing you can pretty much always find at the thrift store is floral printed fabric. And even if it's not in the fabric section, look through all of the clothing, all of the fabric there, because that can essentially be transformed into any pillow or any other textile you might be wanting for your space. I've recently been loving the shape of this round pillow that has just one button in the middle, almost like a tufted look. I love the one from Lulu in Georgia, but it is almost $100. So I was trying to think of a way of how I can get this look for a whole lot less. Starting off with a round placemat that I had from last year, I'm just going to remove that finishing trim so I can apply that after I apply the new fabric. And also, if you happen to find a placemat that you already really like the shape of, all you essentially have to do is fill that placemat and then add the button, which I'll share with you later. Because this pattern is just a little too vibrant for me, I decided to set that one off to the side, but still use the backing so I can use it for this fabric. This was just a t-shirt that I found at my thrift store, but I loved the print and the pattern because I have this olive green chair that you guys might remember in my living room space, and it is the exact tone of that green shade that I'm really looking for. Placing the back of the placemat on top of my fabric, just going to remove it so I have two identical pieces of fabric so that way I can pin them and then buzz them through the sewing machine. If you don't have a sewing machine or know how to hand sew, there are a lot of different ways you can achieve this look using fabric-specific adhesives. After those two pieces of fabric have then been sewn together, I'm also going to sew most of this trim piece around as well, pinning that to the fabric. Then now taking that through my sewing machine, leaving an opening at the top so I'll be able to still fill the pillow, but the majority of the pillow is already completed. For the filling, you can essentially use anything, but I just decided to use an old pillow that I was getting ready to donate and took the stuffing from that. Or you can of course buy an insert from Amazon. After the pillow's been completely filled in, then now it's just time to add our button detail. So the first thing I did was take the button, hand sew it into place, and then to stack on top of that so it looks nice and finished, we're going to take another button, recover that, and that way it just looks nice and seamless. While I still definitely like the one from Lulu in Georgia better, I think that for a few dollars I'm able to achieve a pretty similar look. So I have this wall mounted light here. Knew that I was going to need to replace the shade, and lucky for me, I hoard lampshades. If I ever find a really beautiful one, I always make sure to pick it up. I found this shade months ago at the antique mall, and I thought it was going to be perfect for this wall mounted shade. I felt like the scale was better too, just didn't love the color. So I decided to first paint the inside of this shade in a aged brassy color. You guys have seen me do this a billion times. It's just layering different spray paints, rub and buff if you need it, dark brown matte spray paint, black spray paint, just to create the depth that you get from patinaed brass. Finished it off with some satin black spray paint to the top of the light fixture just to make it match the wall mounted component. The key with spray paint to make it look really nice and seamless, like it was always that color, is just many, many, many light coats. I've watched other people in my life spray paint, and it always makes me cringe a little bit because they're A, way too close to the item they're spray painting, and B, that first coat is so heavy and so thick. Not only will that take forever to dry, you of course will have some drip marks then. So just take your time. There's no need to rush. This is supposed to be a fun and creative experience. So I just like to take my time with projects, and I feel like usually I get a pretty good end result. The next project piece was this dough bowl here. I ended up bringing my grandma to the Hartville thrift shop, and when I decided to bring this home, she was a little scared, and I just told her, Grandma, by the time you see this thing again, it's going to look so beautiful and so expensive. Started off by just taking some nail polish remover to remove all of the acrylic and spray paint that was applied to the dough bowl, and then of course we'll sand it down just to make sure everything is nice and smooth. So then for the inside, I get eaten alive by mosquitoes during the summer, so I wanted to make a really large scale, beautiful citronella candle. Melted down the wax, used those same wicks, and we are just going to place the wicks in place. I decided to use 4, but it just totally depends how big your bowl is and the shape of your bowl. But I thought that 4 was a nice amount to make sure that when it melts down pretty evenly. For the wicks to stay in place, just grab a couple kebab sticks and then put the wick inside, just tape around so they stay nice and straight. Candles just like this from Pottery Barn and Anthropologie, even Home Goods, you're at least going to spend $35, $40. And if you can just spend a little bit of time and just about $10, you can have a super similar look on a budget. Next up were these. I'm not sure what these are intended for. I could guess that this used to be some sort of a standing shelf. However, one thing that really drives me crazy about our back patio is we have a hot tub and we don't have a place to hang our swimsuits and our towels in a non-cluttered way. It always just seems like everything is thrown on a chair, thrown on a table. So I thought this might be a nice thing to create a drying rack that we could just have right outside, hang the pieces from there, but it looks nice while it's out there. I first just attached 2 of them with wood glue, just tried to line them up and clamp them down for the wood glue to dry. I ordered these brackets off of Amazon that were okay for outdoor siding. I like that I could fold this down when it's not in use, but while it is, it looks nice enough to be outside. Next up was a really simple woven tray. I loved that this material, it's almost like a plasticky kind of feel, which makes it really great if it's outside because you can wipe it down and it's good as new. Only thing was it just started to become unraveled. And so if it was unraveled, it can also be re-raveled. So that's all we're doing with this, taking a little bit of hot glue, spending about 5 minutes, and it's really good as new. Next up was this really beautiful large scalloped plate. I thought this would just be much prettier as some sort of a display or cake stand, especially for Easter. So I had this candle that I bought from Target a few months ago, just going to melt down the very little wax that is left. I personally just use a double boiler system, just have some boiling water underneath whatever you're trying to melt down and then just pour out the remainder of the wax in something safe that you could discard and then just clean it off like any other bowl. Connected the 2 pieces together using Loctite glass glue, just making sure to let that fully cure before touching it. Pieces like these don't have to cost a lot of money. You can just create things with things you already have or things that you find at the bins super affordably. In order to really capture that Anthropologie style, I think it is that one part really feminine, kind of dainty, quirky kind of decor, but then it's balanced with some really rustic pieces. A lot of their pottery pieces, especially on their website, have a kind of distressing to them. They're heavily textured. And sometimes you really do just get lucky at the thrift store and find really beautiful, true kind of terracotta clay pots that are exactly the color, the shape, the style that you're looking for. However, you want to take into account, especially if you're shopping at the bins, the weight that something might be. So at my Goodwill outlet, anything over 10 pounds is then half off. And because this is considered a glassware item, it's just 25 cents per pound, which made this really beautiful, almost in like perfect condition. I had to touch up a few spots, but this pot was just under $5 and is so perfect. Can be used all year long, indoor or outdoor, with fresh florals or a plant. The first thing I needed to do was drill a hole through the bottom so that way I would have drainage for the plant that I was planning on using. In order to do that, I used a masonry drill bit. These are super affordable. I believe I bought mine from Amazon for around the $10 price point years ago. And now I'll have adequate drainage for my hydrangeas that they need so they're not just sitting in water. And it was so close, but just still a little too tall. So what I like to do, just remove that plastic piece at the top and then just about an inch or two, so then that way you don't see the plastic part. This is really just to avoid actually planting it within the pot, and it can stay in this container instead. So after removing the top section there, we have our drainage hole in place. I just wanted to add some felt pads to the bottom so it didn't scratch up my table when I'm having to take it off to water it. For anybody wondering, these are specifically Ice Boy hydrangeas. Here's the QR code if you are interested in doing a little bit of research on those. All that's left to do now is place it in the middle of the table. However, when you're thrifting pottery, more often than not, at least 1 or 2 modifications might need to be made. So my initial thought for this was I was just going to paint it white to get it to look like the one from Anthropologie. Last minute decided to, instead of paint it, just sand off that high contrast porous texture just to give it a more kind of earthy feel, which is definitely more my aesthetic. Interesting thing about this piece of pottery was it already had a really nice sized drainage hole at the bottom, but rather than use it for that reason, I decided to turn it into one of these really trendy kind of rustic table lamps that are super expensive on high-end retailer websites. I took the lid off of an old container, drilled a hole through that so I would be able to stick my lighting component through, and that way that could stay nice and sturdy. Fished the remainder of the cord through the bottom so I could plug it in, added a previously thrifted lampshade that I had on hand, and this was the end result. Something comparable at Anthropologie would cost hundreds of dollars. So taking something secondhand and just kind of repurposing not only gives me the look I'm trying to achieve, but at a price point I can afford. Which of course now brings me to lighting, which is one of the most expensive areas through Anthropologie, I would say. Wall art, mirrors, furniture, and lighting, that's where things can get just really crazy expensive. And a common material used throughout Anthropologie's website that is very expensive is marble. Finding marble pieces at the thrift store is definitely possible. One really nice thing about marble, alabaster, those materials, travertine, those materials will really stand the test of time. I ended up finding this carved marble table lamp for just $8. I did a Google image search and it turns out a pair of these is selling for over $2,000 on Cherish. I'm not sure if it's actually worth that, but even still, $8 is a steal in comparison to any marble table lamp you would find through Anthropologie. One thing that I definitely needed to do was give this lamp a major cleaning. I just used a marble cleaner from the Dollar Tree. It worked perfectly just to give it a good shine again. And then also there were a few pieces of tape that were really just stuck on there, so I had to spend some time removing those. But the main issue was I really needed to find a lampshade for this table lamp. I always buy my lampshades at the thrift store because they are so much more affordable. They're usually around $3, which is exactly how much I paid for each one of these lampshades. One thing you want to pay attention to is your lampshade fitter. So for a spider lampshade, you usually have to have some sort of a harp for the lampshade to sit on top of. So this did already come with the harp, but as you can see here, you're never supposed to see that socket there. So I decided to remove that part and instead use an Uno lampshade so that way it would sit nice and low and cover that electrical part. So even if your thrifted table lamp comes with a harp, you don't necessarily have to use it, especially if you're finding that it seems disproportionate to the base. Whenever I'm thrifting for really great lighting, I always just like to refer back to the inspiration. So maybe this shade here is perfect, maybe just add some sort of a wooden base, or this piece here might just benefit from a good clean. One material I'm seeing kind of a surge of, especially over the last 6 months, I would say, is nickel, stainless steel, more chrome pieces than I have in years prior. So when I found this light here, I thought this would be perfect for my son's room. It just really needed to be cleaned. So I just used a cleaner specific for nickel, which is what this lamp is made of, gave it a good polish. If you're just starting out, thrifting your lighting can save you a significant amount of money when furnishing your space. We cannot talk about Anthropologie and not talk about all of the amazing candles that they have. They have every different style, shape, size you can think of. They're always a little quirky, a little fun. They have some personality to them. When I was at the Goodwill bins, I found this chandelier here. So I just decided to take the parts that I wanted, which were just the florals. It reminded me so much of this piece here from Anthropologie, as well as many other varieties of the same kind of look. Thrifted this base piece here for just 50 cents, and we're just going to combine the two pieces together. So in order to do that, I needed to drill a small hole through the bottom of this plate, and I'm just going to widen one of the metal flowers so that way a taper candle can fit inside of here. Whenever drilling through metal, just add a little bit of tape so you get a nice clean kind of cut there, and then just pick a drill bit that's similar in size, maybe a little bit smaller, so then that way you get a nice tight fit in there. Tested out the screw before adding the floral component inside, and then simply screwed the two pieces together. For the color, just to kind of unify everything and make it feel a little bit more like my space, I just decided to spray paint first with just some metallic brass spray paint, and then just gave a dusting of black spray paint to make it look a little bit more patinaed. I think for just a few dollars, we get an overall really similar look, but on a major budget. Lanterns are really popular, lots of different styles on Anthropologie's website, and you can also just kind of create your own version of that using thrifted items. So for example, I found this piece here as well as this little piece for just a few dollars. Found this wall hook for just $1 at the Hartville thrift shop. We're just going to combine all of the pieces together for under $10 and make a hanging lantern. I do plan on using this outside for solar lighting come spring and summer, but for right now we are just going to use a little rechargeable magnetic puck light so that way it stays nice and put. I did hammer down that prong that was sticking up so that way I could get a nice kind of clean connection between the puck light and the base of what was once a candle holder. And we're just going to simply combine all the pieces together. These are great in areas if you don't have awesome electricity going there or just lighting in general. You can just pop this right up and it gives just a little bit more light, and it also looks beautiful. More often than not, however, you'll find a really great wooden piece that either is missing a piece or is damaged in some way. And in this case, I believe there used to be a bottom piece. I think this was a table at some point, and then also it was damaged in one small area. But because it was only $5, the fix was rather easy, and we're just going to repurpose it in a different way. Started out by just taking some wood glue and just kind of filling in that slot there that was starting to disconnect. Just wrap it with a rubber band and let it sit for a few hours. While Anthropologie does just have really beautiful live edge wall shelving, and I could have done that, but I really love from Anthropologie their bath trays. They just feel really special, but they are pretty expensive. So I just decided to take some extra hardware that I had on hand. I think the brass makes it feel a little bit more Anthropologie. I think if I were to do matte black hardware, it would come across a little bit more industrial. Another type of wood I see often on Anthropologie's website is burl wood. About a month ago, I found this burl wood shelf that was originally from Hobby Lobby and wasn't that expensive to begin with, but I probably paid around $1 for it. I also found this round piece here that I'm sure had a mirror in it, but the only piece that was at the bins was this piece here. So I just felt to give it a little bit more visual interest, I wanted to combine the two pieces together. In order to do that, I decided to just pre-drill some small holes because I wasn't sure if this piece was going to snap if I just drilled a screw right through it. So I just decided to pre-drill a hole and then screwed the pieces together in from the back so the shelf would be nice and upright. I also then needed to add a means to hang it, so I just added a Z bracket from a frame that I wasn't using to the top of the back of this frame here. And this is how it came together. For just a few dollars, I added a little bit more functionality to my space and a lot more visual interest. In the artwork section of my thrift store, I found this live edge piece here that was just a welcome sign. It was just $3. If that fits in with your aesthetic, perfect. There's not really anything that needs to be done to this necessarily, but I really wanted to turn this into an entryway shelf for my sister's entryway. Step one is, of course, just disinfecting and cleaning it. And then I was hoping that I would be able to peel back on those letters, but unfortunately I did have to sand them off, which just took a little bit of elbow grease. I was able to remove pretty much all of the lettering within 30 minutes. To even out some of the discoloration where the letters used to be, I just decided to go over it with some taupe paint, just some spray paint. I just gave it one light dusting, so then that way when I went in to apply my wax, it gave a more even finish. I added one coat of wax to the top as well as all around the sides just to give it a more complete and finished look. If the wood that I found had been thicker, I would have definitely just tried to make it like a floating shelf. But because it was quite thin, I wanted to go with the L brackets instead, just to make sure it would be nice and secure and wouldn't snap. You can get L brackets anywhere. I found these for just about $3 a piece at Lowe's. Taking a closer look at my sister's entryway, the table just seemed to be disproportionate to the wall that it was sitting in front of. But I also understand why she didn't do a longer furniture piece that also had this depth, because then she wouldn't be able to open her front door. But by instead choosing something that was thinner but longer, it just occupies the space in a really beautiful organic way, but it was done so affordably because I shopped secondhand. One of my favorite things that Magnolia and Hearth and Hand, I think they've been doing more of this recently, is adding just really creative, beautiful ways to store different items. The wall shelving through the Magnolia line is one of my absolute favorites because it feels very interesting. It is expensive, but it's just those little things that make your space feel a little bit more unique. And shopping at the thrift store is a really great way to find those kind of one-of-a-kind pieces, but on a major budget. Now, you almost always need to do some sort of DIY project to them. For example, I found this storage basket here, and all of the baskets are $3 unless otherwise marked, and this one had no other markings on it, and it was a fairly large basket. So because of that, I thought, even if it doesn't pan out, I'm only out $3. Especially when I went over to Target and saw that a storage basket much smaller was $40. Started off by just, of course, cleaning the basket. That's kind of a no-brainer. Steam and disinfectant spray is usually what I like to do. The biggest change that I really wanted to make with this basket, because the function was actually really nice, it was just the color that was just way too orange. So if you are ever trying to paint a basket, what I like to start off first by doing after cleaning it is paint it with a really great primer. I will link the one that I like to use. You want to make sure that you're really killing all of those orange tones, so then that way when you go in with your wax combination, it will apply really evenly. So the wax combo that I like to use is a brown antiquing wax, and then it's a white wax mixed together in equal parts, and then I like to use a wax brush. And I think you just get, it's hard to explain. It's just like the perfect basket tone. Again, I have to be really careful when I shop at the thrift store because my floors have a kind of grayish yellow undertone, and finding $3 baskets that are the right undertone just don't exist. So shopping secondhand, you're able to really transform pieces using really simple and inexpensive technique. Now, because my plan for this is to put it up on the wall, almost like a rattan cabinet, I wanted to find some really interesting hardware, and I wasn't finding exactly what I was looking for. So I grabbed from my little girl's old mobile. Now that she's in a big girl bed, we don't use it anymore. So I just grabbed one of the pieces from that, almost like a back plate to an existing piece of hardware that I just had in my stash. And I'm just going to combine those two pieces together. So I needed to drill a hole in that little metal piece. One thing, if you are ever drilling anything, really, you should wear goggles, but especially with metal, just because of the metal shards that can kind of fly out. I just wanted to tape that metal piece down so it would stay nice and secure, and then that way the shards would just kind of stay on the tape. All that was left to do then was just combine the pieces together. So I needed to drill that hole so then that way I could place the screw in from the back to the back plate and then be able to twist on that knob piece. The last time I was at the Goodwill bins, I had found these cork sheets that were fairly thick, and I wanted to add something a little bit more solid on top of the shelves, so then that way they would just be a little bit more sturdy in case I wanted to put some smaller items in here. I'm planning on using this in my bathroom just to kind of add a little bit more storage, but in a beautiful way. Hang a little towel from one of the handles, just make it feel really custom and personal to me. Now let's talk about those specialty hooks. You know the ones I'm talking about, the ones that are ridiculously overpriced from Anthropologie or even through Magnolia, but you can definitely do this just using thrifted items. So I found this wood trivet, just did the taupe and wax trick just to kind of make it feel a little bit more modern. I found this little aged brass flower drawer pull, and there was only one of them, so perfect for a situation like this one. I just took a Z bracket from a frame that I wasn't using and just attached it to the back of this piece, so that way I would have a means to hang it, just to give me a means to kind of screw the knob and this piece together. I just screwed a hole directly in the middle, combined the pieces together, and pieces like this are really what make your space feel custom to you when you can source and curate and combine things together that no one else in the world has, and you can do it so affordably by shopping secondhand. Another kind of scent related thing that I just can't imagine anybody actually spending $40 on this is to make a stovetop simmer. You guys probably have a lot of these ingredients at home. I know I do. So, I mean, even if you have to go out and buy the lavender, and you would get a whole bundle of lavender, but I wouldn't buy it from the Hearth and Hand line. You can get like twice as much at Trader Joe's and it smells exactly the same. But just look through the ingredients of the one that you're really trying to replicate and see how many of those ingredients you can really do. So like for this lemon and lime one, I didn't have any limes, but I have tons of lemons. So I just took this old container that I wasn't using anymore, just popped the top off, gave it a good clean, grabbed some lemons from the fridge, and then just take your baking tray, line it with either aluminum foil or parchment paper, slice the lemons, limes, oranges, whatever you're using, just slice thinly. Bake at 225 for 3 hours, maybe flipping every 45 minutes about, and they will be exactly like what you would see on Magnolia's website. Other really great little things I like to collect are pieces that don't take up a ton of space. Like this little wood bowl here, there's, I'm sure, 1,000,001 ways to use this little bowl. Obviously, you can use it as a bowl, but you can also use it as a bookend, just propping it up that way or this way, or just taking items like, for example, this butter press mold. I don't intend on ever probably using it for that reason, but having these little vintage pieces are great. Just taking the mold, separating it, putting it on the inside. Because this was designed to be food safe, I have no problem just sticking some extra kitchen items like garlic or whatever it may be. Just a beautiful way to store produce on a budget. So I'm gonna just run through a couple little quick things you can do. If you come across a piece of vintage furniture, a vintage wood piece that you really love, but it definitely needs some TLC. Some problems with this piece here were the top section. Some of the layers of wood were missing, as well as both of the spindles on either side of the middle shelf were also missing. But every problem has a solution. You just have to find the one that's gonna fit the best. Always love to start out with a really good disinfectant and clean, get all the dust and grime removed from any wooden piece. With the wooden layers that were starting to separate, because I didn't want those to break off as well, I just attached them with some Gorilla wood glue and then clamped it down. For the smaller nicks out of wooden furniture, I just like to use wood filler. I like this one specifically because it never dries out. For the larger imperfections, I like to use this material here. It is called Quick Wood. It's almost like a clay material, but what is nice about this is that you can mold it to whatever you need, which in a piece like this is really important because there was a lot of details in that top section there. So I wanted to make sure that I would be able to mold that Quick Wood on. And of course I can just sand it off and make it nice and smooth, but I like to do that so then that way it becomes all uniform. After we go in with our paint and our stain, you would never know that there was anything missing from this top section here. Of course, we'll do the taupe and wax trick. You can take any taupe paint that you find. This one I tried is called Driftwood. It's a little bit more gray undertoned, which I think a lot of true primitive pieces really have. Then I'm just going to take several different types of brushes to get that wood grain look that I'm really trying to achieve. I'll also go in with a light brown paint and mix that with a small detail brush to make sure everything looks nice and seamless. Pieces like these are great in kitchens. You can use them to store different glassware or mugs. I'm choosing to use it in a bathroom, so we're going to collect a bunch of different thrifted accessories and place them on this shelf here. Places like Magnolia or Shop Amber Interiors charge so much for things that look just like this, and just with a little bit of TLC, you can revamp a thrifted piece and make it look so beautiful. Also, don't forget about the power of repurposing older vintage wooden pieces. I found these little wooden cubes. I just simply took some glass glue, some cloches that I also thrifted, flipped them upside down, and now I have some large scale glass wood vases. Another wood piece I find very often at thrift stores are wooden rolling pins, and there are infinite amount of projects you can do with rolling pins. So as far as I'm concerned, what you have are 2 wooden handles and a really thick wooden dowel. For the handles, you can cut those off and use them to stamp any fabric, create whatever design you would like. Those can be really great for that. Slicing them down a little bit thicker can be little lids for hurricane vases from the Dollar Tree. Just add some sort of a handle for the top so you can pull them out, or also just leaving them a little bit taller so you can use them as a base to another thrifted piece. There are lots of fluted and scalloped marble pieces through Shop Amber Interiors line. So when I'm at the thrift store, I'm looking for marble pieces that are good quality, still in really good condition, that I could just maybe repurpose a bit. So I'm going to take a small section from this large wooden dowel and this scalloped marble tray, and then with E6000 I'm going to attach our wooden dowel to the bottom. And now what we have is kind of a raised cake stand, a raised tray. This is great for shelf styling. This is great in a kitchen, great if you're hosting, and it was so affordable because we shopped secondhand. Moving along now into textiles, same kind of deal here. As far as I'm concerned, if I find any waffle knit fabric, it doesn't matter if it's a towel, a robe, a shower curtain, just plain old fabric, it doesn't matter, because I can now make that fabric into whatever I'm needing in that moment. I found this waffle shower curtain that was originally from World Market. It is 100% cotton, just like the one from Shop Amber Interiors, but instead of leaving it as a shower curtain, I just removed that grommet section from the top because I won't be needing it. And then I'm simply just going to fold the fabric in half and cut that down long ways. Going to just pin the side down that I cut, making sure that it's symmetrical with the other side, and then we'll just buzz that as well through the sewing machine. So now what I've created for $2 is some really great large waffle bath towels, which I was definitely more in need of than another shower curtain. You could even take this a step further and grab some fringe trim and just sew that on as well, so you get more similar to the look from Shop Amber Interiors. There's honestly so many different things that you can repurpose from the thrift store to get that really elevated look on a budget. Whenever I'm looking at the Magnolia website, I like to look for repetition in shapes and colors and materials. So this twisted detail is all over the website. This really tall, skinny lamp at the thrift store for just $6. You could, of course, leave this as it is if you like the lampshade, if you're in need of a tall, skinny lamp, but I am not. So I decided to just remove the lighting component and make this the base for our faux brass side table. Simply by just removing the socket from the top, cutting all the cords, pulling them out, now you're just left with this base structure here. For the top of our little martini side table, you just always want to keep proportion and scale in the back of your mind. So because the base of this table is really small, I remembered that I had previously thrifted and DIY'd this other also really small tabletop. So I just took that piece and added it to this one, just used some super glue gel here. You could also use E6000 here, just make sure that everything is beginning to cure before you move it to take it outside to paint it whatever color you want. I did my typical aged brass paint. I'll link all of the supplies in the description box below. Because I had all of the supplies, this table really only cost $6, and I think it looks really beautiful on a budget. My mom and stepdad were getting rid of this table here. Now there was tons of mildew, so much discoloration from the sun, really just beat up by the weather, but the bones of this table are so solid. Started off with a power wash and let it fully dry before sanding it down. I would never make you guys sit through hours of me sanding, but just know that it is an investment in your time. I usually start out with 80 grit, something a little bit more abrasive, and then I'll finish it off with 220 grit. And the purpose of doing this is so that way everything is nice and smooth and as even as it possibly can be before you apply your stain. With everything then sanded down, it was just time now to choose a stain. And because my stamped concrete is on the gray side, I wanted something that was going to complement that tone. I ended up going with the color of the year for 2025 by Cabot. This is not sponsored in any way. It is called Burnt Hickory, and I chose to do it in a semi-solid finish so that way it would still have some blocking ability for spots that were still uneven. To apply the stain, I like to use brushes that, yes, they're a little bit more expensive, but they're an investment in your sanity. When you use a brush that is designed for stain, that is a nice size, it really expedites the process. And because the brush is good quality, you're not going to have bristles falling out all of the time. Because the tabletop and the 6 chairs, everything is slatted, it can be really challenging to get in those nooks and crannies. So the easiest thing I found was to just take an old lint-free towel, just dipping the middle in the stain, and then on either side being able to hold that fabric, pushing that middle section in between so that way everything is really nicely covered. With the table in place, it's just time now to bring the chairs in. Now, you can sit in these chairs without a cushion, but I ended up finding these really beautiful Pottery Barn cushions that were the exact dimensions that I needed for these chairs, and it just makes it so much more comfortable to sit on. The only thing that was wrong with them, one of them was missing the ties that you would tie to the back of the chair, and then there was some pilling happening on pretty much every top. So I just took my fabric shaver. Little things like these are just good to keep on hand so that way when you have a really great piece that you find at the thrift store, the fix is super convenient and easy. With our table complete, it's just time to now move on to the lounger. Again, these were just incredibly expensive. Usually at thrift stores, the variety is more a little something like this, but then I found this lounger here. It was originally $110 at the thrift store, then they cut it in half to just $55, and then I got 20% off of that. After a good power wash and disinfectant, I really just wanted the chair to be black. I kept looking back at my inspiration, and all of the chairs that I pinned were with a black chair with a black cushion. I also loved the silhouette of this chair specifically. Also, something I like to do just to make sure I get a super clean finish is it's a lot of light coats, and I also like to separate pieces first so that way I can really get the cleanest finish overall. Sometimes when things are already attached, it's hard to get into certain areas. So separate what you can, get to those areas first. Now for the spray paint that you choose to use, you want to make sure it is going to weather the storm. And if you have metal on your lounger like I do, you want to make sure that the spray paint that you're using also has qualities that have rust prevention. With the troublesome places covered, now it's just time to reattach the chair and then just spray paint it all together now. With our lounger complete, it's just time now to find a cushion. Now, again, I know you don't need a cushion. You could just as easily just put a towel here and that's fine, but I wanted to really make it as comfortable and relaxing as possible. So for several weeks, I kept checking Facebook Marketplace every day for a black lounger cushion. I only needed one, but because they were selling 2 for $25, I felt that that was a really fair price, especially because they were really in perfect condition. There was no fading, there was no wear and tear to these whatsoever. They were the perfect dimensions. When I did a price comp online, I went to Home Depot. I couldn't find the exact same one, but something similar at Home Depot today is almost $110 for just one, and I paid $25 for 2. All that really needed to be done was just to, of course, disinfect it, and then I just take my shop vac just to remove any lint or dust that might be remaining on this cushion. Because I have 2 and only really need one, I just decided to put the other one in my deck box, and if the one that is sitting on the chair gets wet, I can just swap them out. because I really wanted this to feel like a retreat, give all the vacation vibes. I've been loving seeing these outdoor pool towel valets. But $300 to hang up a couple towels just seems like a little ridiculous, so I decided that I was going to see what I could find at the thrift store. I found this really beautiful brass one, but I felt that it was just going to eat up too much of my back patio space, so I opted for this smaller metal one here. I'm pretty sure this is actually meant to go in a bathroom, but because it was a little bit smaller, it actually fits my space really well. From a distance, didn't look too bad, but up close, you could really see that it was starting to rust, which is just normal. When you have metal mixed with wet towels, of course, you will have rust. So using my barkeeper's friend, this is also what I use to clean my grill, just taking a sponge, and it really works so well. I know on social media, everybody's telling you to buy and you need all these things, and you truthfully probably don't. If you just have something that could use a really good cleaning, that in and of itself will make a huge difference in your space. With everything wiped down and clean, I really liked the black iron one from Pottery Barn, so I went in with this high performance enamel spray paint first. These enamel spray paints are really wonderful if you are trying to spray paint something that is constantly interacting with water. I've used this on my bathroom faucet before, and it still looks like the day I spray painted it. Sometimes at the thrift store, you can find the tops of roll top desks or some of these dividing privacy curtains that are made of wood. And you can use this material to get that same kind of look on a budget. This piece here was just $4 in otherwise pretty good condition. I actually really liked that there was some distressing on some of the panels. I found more of this material than I usually find at the thrift store, so I thought this would be great for either a larger scale piece of furniture like a coffee table, or make multiple pieces of furniture, which is what we will be doing. From Lowe's, I grabbed one of these building forms for just under $9 and two of these wood rounds that were each just under $9 as well. So to make these two tables, I'm gonna spend under $30 because I have all of the other supplies. A few different ways you could do this. You could either cut your quick tube in half so you can make little nightstands, little side tables, or in my case, I wanted to make tables that were staggered. So I took some measurements. I removed this one panel because it was the only one that was missing sections from both the top and the bottom. Really nice thing about this is you could just do so with some fabric scissors or some heavy duty shears. Applied those same measurements from the quick tube onto our paneling now, just to make sure that they're gonna match up correctly. Took the paneling out to my miter saw and I just followed along the markings that I made after measuring. For the tube, I couldn't use my miter saw to cut it, so I just decided to use a hacksaw, but because this is essentially just really heavy duty cardboard, you could even just use a box cutter. This was basically kind of the look I was going for. I have this one corner in my house that just always seems to be lacking, and I thought this could add some nice visual interest, use it as little plant stands or just for decor, make a really nice moment. Once I wrapped the paneling around, I realized that I had one extra panel that I didn't need, and I wanted them to line up perfectly, so I just removed that again using my scissors. Ideally for this, I wish I had liquid nails that was not completely frozen, so I would recommend using liquid nails in this case instead of E6000, just because I think you'll get a more instant hold and it's just more appropriate for the materials in this project, but E6000 does work fine. Everything is still holding up great. For paint, I first just went in with a dusting of driftwood spray paint just so I could still see the grain through it. And then I'm taking a combination of Tinsmith gray and then antiquing wax, mixing that together with just a slight amount of water just to dilute it a little bit, again, so you can still see that grain. This is the exact thing I do. Dip the brush in water, go into with the gray, then the wax, and then you just kind of blend it all together until you get a nice seamless look. Pottery Barn definitely carries one of my favorite tones of wood, and it is just the most neutral brown you can get, and that is always what I'm trying to achieve when I'm working on different wood projects. Pottery Barn has recently dropped so many beautiful new pieces for spring. I loved the silhouette of this glass stem vase, but $50 is just a little pricey for what you're getting. Now the Big Lots by me is closing, so I'm getting basically everything 50 to 70% off at this point, and I found so many gems. One of the gems I found was this vase here. It ended up being just under $7, and I think you get an overall really similar look, but on a budget. Pieces like these can be really versatile because I can split these tables up and do one as more of like a plinth style, make another one a side table, or I can stack them together like I'm showing here, and you can do so affordably by shopping. A reason I really enjoy going to Pottery Barn, although I rarely buy anything, I just like to see the materials they're using, the colors they're using for seasonal decorating. One of my absolute favorite pieces for spring was this one here, this brass rounded vase with these magenta hot pink florals. So I kept my eyes out at the thrift store, and while I did find brass vases, they weren't necessarily the same shape that I was looking for or the right tone. So whenever I find something that I really love, I really just study the picture over and over and over again. I'll keep referring back to it, and I think to myself when I'm thrifting, what can I DIY to get this look? Where that brass rounded vase would be really hard to come by, I think fishbowl style vases are super easy to come by, and they're usually pretty cheap because there's a lot to choose from. This one here was just 50 cents and very similar to the silhouette from the bowl vase from Pottery Barn. So our challenge is, how do we make a glass vase look like a patinaed textured metal? So everything always starts out with a good clean, and then I needed to get that texture underneath. So gave it a gentle scuff sand and then went in with just mixing some grout with any color of acrylic paint. It doesn't matter because we're going to paint over it anyway, but it's just to get that texture that metal really has. If you don't have grout on hand like I do, you could use a textured spray paint. You could also mix baking soda with acrylic paint, or you could even mix sand with Mod Podge. A lot of different options to get this kind of textured effect. With the texture in place, now it's time to use everything in our spray paint arsenal to get a layered look. So I have textured black spray paint, several different colors of metallic spray paint to get closer to the look. When you really study the vase from Pottery Barn, it has a lot of layers. So I like to make the first layer with the black spray paint, and then I'll layer on top of that the metallic spray paint, because then when you go to sand, you're still getting your primary color being brass, but underneath you notice that darkness there that can really shine through once you do a little bit of gentle sanding. Throughout this process, I'll keep layering in different things like acrylic paint or antiquing wax. I'll keep referring back to the Pottery Barn image and really studying what is mine missing that theirs has that I love. And I will keep tailoring it until I'm happy with the end result. Once you are happy with your end result, just make sure you seal it, lock that color in place. Now it's time to find those hot pink florals. This is definitely a challenge. I live in Northeast Ohio. While I might be able to find those hot pink peonies maybe in late spring, early summer, it's definitely not an option right now. I called all the florists in town and they don't have them. So I just tried to find something similar at my local floral shops to get an overall pretty similar look on a budget. A wooden detail I've been noticing Pottery Barn carrying more and more of year after year is carved wood. It's not as dramatic as you'll see through Magnolia or Anthropologie or World Market, but it's definitely still a detail that I wanted to mention. I ended up finding this little bowl here at the Big Lots closeout. This was under $2. I can use this in so many different ways. Right now I'm going to be using it for garlic, but I could turn this into a little bowl for a candle, a little catch-all tray for an entryway table. Truly, the options are endless. One best seller from Pottery Barn that I really love is this wood carved mirror. It's $699. It is absolutely beautiful. And unfortunately, this is not something I ever seem to find at the thrift store. But you do find these metal mirrors, and sometimes they're in better condition than others, but I thought this one was just $4, and it's worth the gamble to see if I can get this to look like carved wood. I wouldn't do this if the metal was brass or silver or any high quality metal. This was just aluminum, so I had no problems painting over it. Also, there were these teeny little holes around the perimeter of the mirror. To remedy that, I had just enough of this twisted trim that I used in another project to place on the inside to make it feel more detailed, and again, adding hopefully to our carved effect. This twisted trim is peel and stick, but honestly the adhesive is terrible, so you do want to go in with something a little bit stronger like E6000 super glue gel, not hot glue, and you just want to make sure that your adhesive is going to stay nice and in place. In order to do that, I just added some painter's tape all around the perimeter to make sure everything was nice and stuck on there. With everything in place, I just removed the tape, and now it was just time to remove that previous paint job. I just did so using nail polish remover that is 100% acetone, used a soft bristle brush just to apply that nail polish on, and then just wiped away any excess. With that part completed, now it's just time to protect the mirror. So I'm just gonna take some of this paper here and some painter's tape, wrap all the way around so the mirror stays nice and protected before we apply all of our painting techniques. To start us off, we're gonna use the same spray paint that we used in the first project called Driftwood. I really like this spray paint, especially because the nozzle allows you to kind of control the level of color that you're getting. In the first project, we went more subdued, and in this project, I wanted everything to be really nicely saturated. Using basically all of the same supplies that we did in the first project, the only change that I made was the type of brush that I used. In the first project, I used a soft bristle brush just to add to that grain effect. In this case, I used a foam brush as well as a round makeup brush just to make sure I'm getting in all of those nooks and crannies rather than it being really well blended. Just like any wooden carved piece of decor or furniture, there are areas that are darker, areas that are lighter, and that's just going to add to that depth and variation in the overall look of the piece. Just peeled back the tape and went over it with a matte clear sealer, and this was the end result. While I definitely preferred the carved mirror from Pottery Barn, I think shopping secondhand gives you the opportunity to test out different styles in your space before splurging on an item you're not even sure if you're really gonna love. Last but not least, let's talk about some lighting options. So usually one of the more expensive areas on Pottery Barn's website and in store, but then I saw this linen drum flush mount. The 18-inch version is only $99, which for overhead lighting is not that pricey. However, I always say it's just worth checking the thrift store. A lot of times you're not going to find what you're looking for, but every now and then you'll come across something that you might just have to finesse a little bit to get the look that you're really trying to achieve. So I found this lampshade here that was just $6. With lighting, there's a ton of things to consider, but you want to make sure that the shade that you're choosing is going to match up with any existing ceiling lighting that you have. So right now we have a semi-flush mount light that basically I could either have something screw into it or I could have something sit on top of it. And because this was just wide enough to slide on top of it, I knew that this would be perfect. Only one little scuff mark on the entire shade. So again, taking some nail polish remover and a little piece of a magic eraser, and I'm just going to ever so gently buff that out. It will dry nice and clear, and no one would ever know that that was there. One thing I don't love, however, is that you can see the lighting through the bottom. So if you guys have any suggestions on how I can cover the bottom, I figured I could just maybe sew something and then place it on the inside, but I want to make sure that that's going to be safe as well. So my temporary solution is just making sure the light bulb that I choose for the space really looks more high-end than just your average light bulb. So I ended up finding this one here at Walmart, and I think it's just a nice temporary solution. Again, any suggestions you guys have, I would really appreciate, so then that way I can just cover out that bottom section there. Moving along now to pottery. One recommendation I have is when you are dream shopping on some of your favorite retail sites, take some screenshots of the things that you really love or copy an image into your notes tab. So that way, before you go to the thrift store, glance through those images so it can be fresh in your mind, the things that you're really naturally gravitated towards, and maybe some modifications you'll need to make to a thrifted piece. Now, this one, for example, really didn't need anything. Decor pieces like this for just $3, even from Target, would be at least $20 or $25, really do make a nice addition to shelf styling. You can leave these as they are, placed on a stack of books, or you could fill them with florals. A detail you'll see often through McGee & Co. and Studio McGee is this twisted trim. When I was at the thrift store recently, I found this large planter here. So I first just went in and spray painted it black just to neutralize it a bit. And then I'm going to add this twisted trim that I picked up from Amazon. That it is peel and stick, but I wanted to make sure that it was really going to stick on well. So I just attached that with some E6000. To make sure that it stays in place, I just taped down all along the top sides there. Waited a few hours before the E6000 really started to cure, and I then just removed the tape. In order to make this porcelain planter look more aged and into a more ceramic stone piece, I mixed equal parts of grout and white acrylic paint. I ended up doing 2 coats just to make sure that everything was really well covered. To give it a more distressed look, I just took a little bit of water and a little bit of wax and painted that on as well. The more water, I think, the better, so you can really evenly blend out that wax. And then to give it that distressed thing, my favorite thing that almost everybody has is a paper towel, and I just kind of dab around until I get the desired amount of distressed look that I'm really trying to achieve. Final thing I wanted to do was add just a little bit of the wax, not diluted, onto that top rim just to give it a more aged look. I hear from a lot of you guys in the comments saying you're really struggling finding great pieces at your thrift stores, so I hope this example gives you a fresh perspective. Unfortunately, I did not find a twisted trim, perfectly aged terracotta planter at the thrift store. I found a porcelain planter that had floral motifs, not my style at all, but just DIYing even a little bit can make all the difference. Moving along now to lighting. Last week, I shared with you guys how you can take a vase or a planter. If it has a hole at the bottom of it already, like this one did, you can turn it into a lamp. Decided to sand some of that paint technique off just so, again, it fit in with my aesthetic a little bit better. Then just took a cap off of an old candle, drilled a hole through it so I'd be able to put the harp that I also thrifted, added a thrifted lampshade, and then just pulled the cord through at the bottom. A super simple project that saved me a ton. So if you're not having luck in the pottery section, another area that's worth checking is lighting. However, last week when I found that marble table lamp base, I just feel that it fit the space a lot better because I DIY'd those marble nightstands. But rather than just donate this old lamp back to the thrift store, I decided to just turn it into a vase. Now, this does not work for every table lamp, but if there is a wooden section that you can kind of just like pry away from the ceramic base, I just did so very gently, going around with a flathead screwdriver and a hammer, and it popped right off. And then you can just paint it whatever color you want. I wanted to keep mine nice and neutral so that way it can grow with me as the seasons change. A large, substantial vase like this from McGee & Co. or really any high-end store would cost at least $70. So the fact that I was able to utilize this as a lamp and now can transition with me into a vase is a really great way to just use things that you already have. With all that being said, that really wraps it up for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. We have a lot of new, exciting content coming in the second half of this year, so make sure you are subscribed because we will be doing a giveaway in August. I hope that everyone is having a fantastic week, and I will see you back here next time. Bye for now.